Alabama, the summer of 1853. The sun hung over the cotton fields like an unforgiving eye, burning down on rows of stooped backs and calloused hands. The air was thick, too thick to breathe, too thick to scream, and the only sounds were the rustle of cotton leaves, the buzz of flies, and the crack of the overseer's whip slicing through it all like thunder. Tobias worked in silence, his shirtless back already glistening with sweat before the day had fully begun. He was tall for his age, 22, but built like an oak, with shoulders broad enough to carry burdens no man should have to bear. His skin was dark, sun-hardened, and streaked with scars that spoke of past punishments, of a life spent under the heel of men who owned the sky, the land, and his body. But not his soul. They hadn't broken that part. Not yet. He moved methodically down the row, fingers nimble, picking cotton with practiced speed. Each tug brought a new jab from the brittle husks, pricking his skin, staining his fingertips. He'd learned not to flinch. Pain had become routine. Breathing had become strategy. In his mind, though, he wandered somewhere else. Somewhere far from the cotton, far from the whip. He saw his mother's face, gentle, round, glowing in firelight as she whispered stories into his ear in the quarters when he was still a boy. Stories of the river gods, stories of the sky people, stories of a land where no one wore chains. She was gone now, sold off when Tobias was 12. He never saw her again. But she had left him one thing, a seed, a knowing. That one day his body might remain in bondage, but his spirit wouldn't. "Don't let them make you forget yourself," she'd said, brushing his hair with rough fingers. "They can steal your hands, but not your mind, not unless you give it." He never gave it. The field was ruled by silence that day, broken only by barked orders from atop a pale horse. Mr. Harlan, the overseer, was making his rounds. He was a man who believed cruelty made crops grow, that fear was more nourishing than food. His hat was tilted low, whip coiled at his side, pistol glinting on his belt. He stopped near Tobias, eyes narrowing. "You think you better than the rest," he drawled, loud enough for others to hear. Tobias didn't answer, he never did. His silence had become its own rebellion. Mr. Harlan's horse stamped the dry dirt. "You think them big shoulders mean you got something to say?" Still, Tobias said nothing. He kept working. Slow, deliberate. Controlled. Harlan leaned down from the saddle, spit near Tobias' feet, and gave a crooked smile. "One of these days, boy, one of these days I'll teach that quiet mouth of yours how to scream." Then he was gone, off to inspect the next row of prisoners laboring under the lie of property. When the day finally ended and the sun dropped below the treetops like a bruised peach, Tobias filed into the toolshed to hang his cotton sack. The air inside was cooler but not restful. Tools lined the walls like weapons in an armory. Rusted blades, broken shovels, dented pails, and there above the door hung the chains. Thick iron coiled like a serpent sleeping. He stared at them. They weren't ordinary chains, these had stories. Each link had touched a back, a wrist, an ankle. Each clink of metal was an echo of a cry. Tobias knew them well. He'd worn them once 3 winters ago when he tried to stop a younger boy from being beaten. The chains had bitten into his skin like teeth, left marks that never faded. But tonight they looked different. Tonight they looked like something else. Not just a tool of pain, but a promise. A circle that could close. A weapon if turned the right way. He didn't touch them, not yet, but he didn't look away either. Morning came with no gentleness. The Alabama sun rose heavy, thickening the air with heat before the dew had even lifted from the grass. The field bell rang, its clanging metal voice summoning them to another day of labor. Tobias stood just outside the shed, hands wrapped in worn cloth, readying his cotton sack. As he turned to join the others, he saw old Josiah stumbling out of the quarters, his steps uneven, shoulders hunched from decades of back-breaking toil. Josiah was 60, maybe 70, no one knew for sure. He had worked this land longer than most of the overseers had even been alive. But that morning, his strength gave out. He dropped his sack. It hit the dry earth with a soft thud and split at the bottom. Cotton scattered like snow over red dirt. Tobias saw it before anyone else. Harlan's voice was already barking from the other side of the field. "Who done that? Who dropped they harvest like a drunk hog?" Josiah panicked, bent down to gather the cotton, hands shaking. Tobias stepped forward before the old man could speak. "That was mine," Tobias said, loud and clear. "I dropped it." Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to pause. Josiah looked up, his mouth parted in protest, but Tobias gave him a sharp look. "Don't speak." The overseer's pale horse trotted over slowly. Harlan sat tall in the saddle, his face amused, cruel. He knew, of course he knew, but this was about something else now. "Well, look who finally got a voice," Harlan said, grinning. "Tobias the Silent, ain't that a miracle?" Tobias didn't reply, he stared straight ahead. Harlan climbed off the horse, handed his whip to another white man nearby, and unhooked something from his saddle. The chains. Tobias recognized them instantly. Not rope, not leather, iron. "Been savin' this for you, boy," Harlan said, voice almost gleeful. "Time you learned what your silence earns." He made Tobias strip to the waist, forced him to kneel in front of the entire field. Slaves stopped working. Some turned away. Others watched, unable to help, unwilling to look away. Harlan tossed the chains over a tree branch, looped one end around Tobias' wrists, yanked him upright. Then the lashing began. The chains didn't crack like a whip. They clanged dull, sickening metal against flesh. Each blow was heavy, not fast, designed to bruise deep, to crush and tear. Tobias bit his teeth together so hard his gums bled. He didn't scream, he wouldn't. 1, 2, 3, he lost count. Somewhere between the 6th and the 10th, his knees buckled. Blood ran down his back, thick and slow. His breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurred. Still, he didn't scream. Harlan, breathing heavily, leaned close. "Say something, just say it hurts." Tobias opened his mouth and spit blood in the dirt. The overseer cursed and threw the chains down. "You're gonna die on your knees, boy, just like the rest." Tobias collapsed into the dust. The chains rattled beside him like snakes slithering home. He was dragged to the edge of the quarters and left there, no water, no bandages, just the flies and the heat, and the silence. That night the quarters whispered. Quiet voices in corners, around fires, in hushed breaths behind wooden walls. Tobias didn't scream. Chains, and he didn't scream. He took Josiah's place, took it like a man. Some called it foolish, some called it brave, but they all remembered it. Inside his small shack, Tobias lay face down on a bed of straw and torn cloth. Every breath was pain. His back was a map of wounds, his blood soaked through the floorboards, but his eyes were open. He stared at the moonlight leaking through the cracks in the roof, and he made a vow, not in words but in bone and soul. He would not remain broken. Not by the lash, not by the chains, not by men like Harlan who mistook cruelty for power. They had his blood, but they would never have the last word. The human body is not meant to heal in chains. Not under the Alabama sun, not in a straw-stuffed shack, not with open wounds and no medicine but salt water and silence. But Tobias healed anyway. It took weeks. His back remained raw, the wounds crusting into ridged scars that never truly stopped aching. Every movement brought a fresh throb, but Tobias refused to falter. He returned to the field sooner than anyone expected, walking stiff but tall, his silence more defiant than ever. He worked without complaint, never drew attention, kept his eyes low and his ears open, but inside something smoldered. Each sunrise was another strike of the flint, each sunset another breath on the ember. The pain in his back became fuel. The memory of Harlan's grin, the weight of iron slicing into skin, etched itself into Tobias' every motion. He didn't want justice. He wanted balance, and he began to watch. The overseer, Mr. Harlan, was not a clever man. He was a violent man, and men like that always believed force was a substitute for foresight. His confidence made him sloppy. He drank more than he should. By late evenings, his shouts from the main house would drift through the trees like foul wind. He rode the same horse, wore the same boots, told the same stories, and he had a habit, twice a week, of taking the shortcut path through the swamp after inspecting the far end of the field. It saved him 20 minutes, and it was where Tobias' thoughts began to settle. One evening, as the sky burned gold behind the pine trees, Tobias lingered near the shed, pretending to repair a split sack. Solomon, an older man missing 2 fingers, stepped beside him without a word. They rarely spoke, but Solomon had watched Tobias that day in the field, saw his gaze follow the overseer's path into the woods. "Swamp don't like strangers," Solomon murmured. "You go in quiet, you come out changed if you come out at all." Tobias didn't look up. "You know the paths," Solomon nodded. "My daddy knew. Passed it to me. There's one spot, looks solid but it ain't, step wrong and it'll swallow a man to his ribs." Tobias finally turned. "Can you show me?" Solomon met his eyes. "Why?" Tobias didn't answer, but something in his stare made Solomon nod again. "Meet me after moonrise." That same night, another whisper reached him. Aunt Mercy, the oldest woman in the quarters, had lived through 4 masters and more beatings than anyone could count. She sat by the cookhouse, humming softly to herself. When Tobias passed, she called out, You plannin' something dark, child? He froze. She didn't look at him, just rocked slowly, eyes half closed. My brother once tried to poison an overseer, thought he could get away with it, ended up hangin' from the tree yonder, tongue black as coal. Tobias stayed silent. But there was another man, she continued, voice like cracked parchment. Drove a cruel overseer into the swamp, said the spirits down there did the rest. That overseer ain't never been found, she smiled then, toothless and strange. Swamp got a memory, like you do. Then she went back to humming. Over the next week, Tobias walked the fields, his body moving on muscle memory, but his mind lived elsewhere, in the reeds, in the mud, in the dark places where screams didn't echo back. Solomon showed him the path. It wound like a serpent through the trees, past moss-draped cypress and black water that rippled with unseen things. Tobias memorized the twists, the rotten logs, the shallow spots, and the pit, the place that looked like dry earth but would drag a man down like quicksand. All it needed was a push, and timing, and rage. He sharpened his patience like a blade, waited for the right night, watched Harlan grow more careless, more drunk, more alone in his power. He could hear it now in the overseer's voice, not just arrogance, but the belief that nothing could touch him. That belief would be his weakness. Tobias worked and waited. Because one day soon the chains would not be on his back, they would be in his hands, and the swamp would remember. The night was thick with heat, though the sun had long disappeared behind the black line of pine trees. The moon, swollen and pale, hung low in the sky, bathing the fields in ghost light. Tobias felt it. Tonight was the night. He had waited, measured each step like a heartbeat, and now the rhythm had changed. He heard it in the distant shouting from the big house, the overseer's drunken drawl rising like a storm wind, heard glass shatter, heard boots hit the steps, then the sound of hooves. Harlan was riding. He came into the field like a shadow cast in noise. His horse was wild with the overseer's erratic reins, lurching between rows of cotton, nearly trampling stalks. Tobias, standing alone by the shed, turned slowly. Harlan reined in hard, the horse stomping and huffing. His eyes gleamed with liquor and rage. There you are, he slurred, boy who don't know his place. He dismounted without grace, stumbling in the dirt. His hand went to his belt, not for the pistol tonight, but for the chains. They clinked, long and familiar. Figure it's time we reminded you what pain tastes like, Harlan growled. Strip on your knees. Tobias didn't move. His chest rose slow and full. His back, still marked with old scars, did not bend. Something in his stillness made Harlan pause. What's this? He scoffed. You get ideas, you get brave now. Tobias took one step forward. I ain't kneelin', he said quietly. Harlan blinked. What you say? I said, Tobias repeated louder now. I ain't kneelin'. Silence. Then laughter, sharp, ugly. You done lost your mind, boy. He lunged, swinging the chains like a whip. But Tobias was ready. He ducked, the metal singing past his ear, and charged. The two men collided like bulls. Dirt flew. Fists landed. The horse bolted into the trees, forgotten. Tobias fought with everything left in him, not clean, not trained, but pure and desperate and burning. Harlan struck him across the temple with the chain. Blood streamed into Tobias' eye, but he didn't stop. He roared, drove his shoulder into Harlan's gut, slammed him into the dirt. The overseer grunted, clawing for his belt, but Tobias wrested the chain from his hand. In one smooth, brutal motion, Tobias turned the weapon against him. He wrapped the iron links around Harlan's wrists, pulled tight, heard the snap of bone or scream, he didn't care which. Get up, Tobias spat. Harlan writhed, spit curses. You're dead, they'll kill you for this, hang you, cut you. Tobias yanked the chain. I said get up. They walked, through the field, past the edge of the woods, down the narrow path that wound through trees and vines and buzzing things that lived in the dark. Harlan tripped. Tobias dragged him. The overseer cried out once more in disbelief than pain. You don't know what you're doing, he hissed. This ain't freedom, you gone mad. But Tobias didn't answer. He knew exactly what he was doing. The swamp welcomed them like a waiting mouth. The trees closed in. The moon vanished behind mist. Frogs croaked. Insects clicked like bones. Tobias stepped carefully. He knew this path now, every root, every shallow spot. He had walked it in his mind 100 nights. The water began to rise, ankle-deep, then knee-deep. Harlan screamed again, half slipping. Please, he begged now. Tobias, boy, I didn't mean to, just let me go. We can fix this. I'll tell him you saved me. Tobias stopped, turned, looked him dead in the eyes. You don't get to beg. He reached the spot, the soft place Solomon had shown him. It looked solid, but the mud there had a hunger. He shoved Harlan forward. The overseer fell with a splash, flailing, choking. The chain tangled in roots, the mud sucked at his legs. Help, God, help! But there was no God in the swamp, only memory, only justice, only Tobias. Snakes moved in the water, eyes gleamed from the banks. Harlan thrashed, screamed, begged, cursed. But slowly, inch by inch, the swamp began to take him. The chain grew taut, the mud climbed to his chest. His voice turned to gurgles, then silence, just bubbles. And then nothing. Tobias stood there a moment, breathing hard. The moon broke through the clouds again, shining silver over the rippling black water. He turned and walked back the way he came, wet to the waist, blood on his brow, no fear in his heart. The chains were gone, and so was the man who once held them. Tobias didn't run that night. He didn't rush through the woods like a hunted man, nor throw himself into the wilderness in panic. He walked, slowly. Deliberately. Each step forward a breaking of some unseen chain, a quiet ceremony of reclamation. The moon guided him back through the trees, past moss-laden oaks and cypress knees that rose from the water like ancient sentinels. His boots squelched with mud, soaked from thigh to toe. His shirt hung in tatters. Blood, swamp water, and sweat stained his skin. But he was not broken. He was free in a way the world could never measure, not with papers, not with laws, not with chains. The night was alive with sound, frogs croaking, owls calling, distant coyotes howling to the stars. But beneath it all, there was something else, silence. A silence so deep it hummed inside Tobias' bones, the kind of silence left behind when a man like Harlan disappears. By sunrise, the plantation was already stirring, but there was no sign of the overseer. His pale horse returned riderless. His whip lay forgotten in the dirt. By mid-morning, whispers curled through the quarters like smoke. Where Harlan at? Didn't sleep in his bunk. Horse came back without him. That's bad omen. Someone said they saw Tobias last. Someone else said he never returned to the quarters that night. By sundown, the white masters sent men into the swamp, rifles loaded, dogs leashed. They searched for 2 days. Found nothing but a length of rusted chains snagged around a cypress root. They called it an accident, said Harlan must have gotten drunk and lost. Claimed Tobias had surely run off, a fugitive, armed and dangerous. A bounty went up. Posters nailed to trees. Promises of reward. But no one in the fields believed the lie. They knew. They said it soft under their breath while picking cotton. Tobias Dunn fed the swamp. Tobias sent that devil back to hell. Tobias walked in with chains and walked out with none. Aunt Mercy, sitting by the fire, muttered prayers with a grin on her face. Solomon never looked at the swamp the same again. And old Josiah, tears in his tired eyes, said, "Boy took the pain meant for me and made it into thunder." But Tobias himself was never seen again. Some claimed he'd run deeper into the swamps and joined the Maroons, the hidden communities of escaped slaves who lived off the land, fought back when needed, and vanished like ghosts. Others said he drowned in the same muck that swallowed Harlan. That justice had cost him everything. A few swore they saw him years later, standing in the back of a crowd in Louisiana, free and cloaked in shadows, a faint scar glinting across his brow. None could say for certain, but certainty was never the point, because Tobias became more than a man, he became a story. A warning. A fire passed from mouth to mouth, hut to hut, long after the overseer's name was forgotten. Children heard it whispered at night, "Be strong like Tobias. Hold your head like Tobias. Don't scream, even when the chains bite." Elders recited it when hope ran thin. Preachers folded it into prayers for deliverance. Freemen told it as folklore, then as history. And when freedom finally came, when the chains were broken by war and blood and the turning of time, the name Tobias was still spoken. Not in shouts, not in sermons, but in whispers, the kind that slip between walls, the kind that keep stories alive, the kind that say we remember, we resist, we rise, and the swamp still holds its silence. Have you ever heard stories like Tobias, quiet acts of rebellion that history tried to erase? Stories whispered in your family, your community, your roots. If this story stirred something in you, if you carry that ancestral fire too, tell us below, what does freedom mean to you? Drop a comment, like this video, and make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories of resistance, legacy, and Black truth that still echo today.